Greetings, friends, one and all. Welcome to the Merry Corncrakes, the official podcast for the Corncrake magazine. The Corncrake magazine is a wonderful digital publication which every month comes out, and it contains classic stories and modern contemporary writings from English literature. In particular, those which are written today are written by independent authors who are trying to engage with traditional forms of writing for the modern age. If that sounds like something you'd be interested in, go to thecorncrakemag.com where you can read it right now. And today, I want to talk a little bit about a book which I have a piece in this month's Corncrake about. It is Edmund Spenser's The Fairie Queene, and you can see I've got my lovely copy here. This is a book which I kind of stumbled across actually because for St. George's Day, I was doing a fair bit of research, and I created a number of videos on St. George. And looking at the tradition, what I discovered was that Edmund Spenser's The Fairie Queene was a huge influence upon the consequent or subsequent ideas about St. George. Because before that point, St. George was primarily known as a Christian saint, as a martyr for his faith, which in the 13th century, or the 13th, 14th centuries, we have the introduction of a legend of him slaying dragons. And that does have some prominence. But by the time we get to Spenser, the character of St. George is sort of shifted in Spenser's imagination from a Catholic medieval saint into a patron saint of England, into a character who represents Englishness and the virtues of being a knight. This is quite a different character, and it's reflective of the work as a whole. The Fairie Queene, published in the 1590s, is a work which is trying to do multiple things at once. It is England's first truly great epic poem, or epic poems. It is a fantastic rite which is inspired by Renaissance Italian works of that period. And it's taking on these ideas in a way which corresponds with what you might call merry old England at the same time. It draws on the world of the fae, of the fairy folk. And when somebody like Spenser is talking about fairies, it isn't, the cute little Tinkerbell, the 19th century cute fairies with lovely wings and very gentle creatures. No, the fae are magical beings, and that can cover a range of magical beings. Giants would be the fae, goblins and trolls would be the fae, elves, probably the most common, elves are the fae. So these beings, they are not angels or demons, they are not humans, they are something else. And they seem to have powers, magical powers. They have rules of their own. They can, in some cases, be good to us, in some cases, be bad. They seem to follow a certain logic. And they are very much tied in with the enchanted world, the places in the countryside, the rivers, the streams, the hills, the mountains, the places untouched by human civilization. We often hear stories of, the king under the mountain. Well, that's the fae living in the other world, as it were, in a parallel world which touches a mountain or a lake or so on. In The Fairie Queene, Spenser is drawing upon that imaginative world of the fairy folk, which many people at its time would have believed in. And he's taking the character of the Fairy Queene as a virtuous character, that she is actually a symbol of good within the natural world. Indeed, the closest one can get without the grace of God. And the plot basically follows several knights sent out by the Fairy Queene to go on a number of different missions. And each story is self-contained, but contributes to an overarching narrative, which was not completed because Spencer died before he could complete the whole set. As we have it, we have 6 stories, each following a different knight on their adventures, having been sent out by the Fairy Queen. So you can just read it as a series of what we might call medieval romances, though they are slightly different in tone. And I think that would be, on that level, they are very engaging. And the passage that I'm going to read today is, I found it thrilling stuff from Spencer, filled with action and verve, lots of character in the images and the situations, very evocative, and the language, the intonation, the rhythm, the breadth of expression, it's all there in Spencer. I can see why Tudor audiences loved this text and why it still resonates today. But Spencer's work also has allegorical meanings, and he's quite clear about this in a letter to Sir Walter Raleigh, which is the preface to this book. He said that the focus of the work is to teach gentlemen, that is, those of nobility or aristocracy, the virtues, to train them up to be model citizens, to be men able to run the country, to defend the country. And so each story is instructive. It has a didactic function in educating a young man how to be a good noble. How does he go about this? Well, each knight symbolizes or represents a specific virtue. So in the case of the Red Cross Knight, who is the hero of the first canto or first book, he symbolizes holiness. And he symbolizes holiness in himself, so you could see his actions as holiness relating to other virtues and vices, insofar as all the other characters also represent virtues and vices. So, for example, there's a character called Fidessa. Well, where we have faith there, but we also have one who is deceptive. We have one who represents pride. We have one who represents truth, and so on. I'm now having a doubt about the name Fidessa, but there is a character of faith, of love, of mercy, and so on. But there is another way in which it is allegorical. There is a sense that Red Cross Knight, when he starts out, yes, he is a kind of holiness, but it is incomplete. It is not fully formed. And actually, the journey that the Red Cross Knight goes on, there's a certain fall and then rise up. He has to go through a process of sin, fall, repentance, and then victory. It's through that turning of himself and change of his priorities that actually true holiness is born in the character himself. So you could see this as also a depiction of how one would get holiness, how one acquires it. So it's both reflecting holiness in itself, like how holiness interacts with other virtues and vices, but then also how that contributes to the development of holiness in itself. So it's a moral text, but it is also a political text. Spencer was an ardent English Anglican. He thought that English Anglicanism was the supreme form of religion, that England was a great country, and that it was under threat from Catholic Europe, in particular Spain and the papacy. And so many of these characters are also allegories of actual historical events and people. For example, the Fairy Queen is often interpreted as a sort of representation of Queen Elizabeth I. There is a character called Prince Arthur. Prince Arthur is King Arthur before he was king. He is on a journey to find the Fairy Queen, and Very often throughout the story, he comes to the rescue of the various virtues who are in danger. So, Red Cross Knight, for example, is trapped in a castle by an evil giant. Having given into the sin of pride, he is defeated and bound up by pride. And it is only Prince Arthur with the shield, able to defend himself, the rock hard shield. He is the symbol of Britain. And so Britain restores the day for the Fairy Queen, for Elizabeth. There is something quite poetic and powerful in that idea. But that is also going on in this text. So there's multiple levels you could read this story on. And that is true of the passage which I want to share with you today, which you can also read in the Corncrake magazine. This comes from the first book, the story of the Red Cross Knight, which many people have said you could just read by itself and not read the rest of the work, and you've got something brilliant. The Red Cross Knight is St. George. We are told that in another place. And he has been sent out by the Fairy Queen with the Princess Una. This is a new innovation, which, as far as I'm aware, comes from Spenser, at least in the English tradition. There are paintings in Italy which depict a princess being saved, but she's not accompanying St. George. And also in the English tradition, St. George saves a princess, but she doesn't accompany him. In this version, we have St. George, who is, although he is a man, he has been raised by the fairy folk. And so he is being sent to help Una, the princess, return to her land and defeat the dragon, which is tyrannizing the people there. On their way, they have just set out, and on their way, they are distracted. And what I want to do is read to you the story, or this little encounter, which St. George has here, in part because when I started reading this text, I did not see this coming, and as soon as it happened, I was hooked. I could not stop reading after this point. It's so powerful, dramatic, vivid, grotesque, and something I'd never ever heard about St. George. So buckle up, get ready for a great reading of Edmund Spenser's The Fairy Queen, Book 1, Chapter 1. At last resolving forward still to fare, till that some end they find, or in or out, that path they take that beaten seem most bare, and like to lead the labyrinth about, which, when by tracts they hunted had throughout, at length it brought them to a hollow cave amid the thickest wood. The champion stout eftsoons dismounted from his courser brave, and to the dwarf awhile his needless spare he gave. Be well aware, quoth then that lady mild, lest sudden mischief ye too rash provoke. The danger hid, the place unknown and wild, breeds dreadful doubts. Oft fire is without smoke, and peril without show. Therefore your stroke, Sir Knight, withhold, till further trial made. Ah, lady, said he, shame were to revoke the forward footing for an hidden shade. Virtue gives herself light, through darkness for to wade. Yea, but, quoth she, the peril of this place I better wot than you. Though now too late to wish you back return with foul disgrace, yet wisdom warns, whilst foot is in the gate, to stay the step, ere forced to retreat. This is the wandering wood, this error's den, a monster vile, whom God and man does hate. Therefore I read, beware. Fly, fly, quoth then the fearful dwarf, this is no place for living men. But, full of fire and greedy hardiment, the youthful knight could not for aught be but forth unto the darksome hall he went, and looked in. His glistering armour made a little glooming light, much like a shade, by which he saw the ugly monster plain, half like a serpent horribly displayed, but the other half did woman's shape retain, most loathsome, filthy, foul, and full of vile disdain. And, as she lay upon the dirty ground, her huge long tail her den all overspread, yet was in knots and many bouts upwound, pointed with mortal sting. Of her there bred 1,000 young ones, which she daily fed, sucking upon her poisonous dugs, each one of sundry shapes, yet all ill-favoured. Soon as that uncouth light upon them shone, into her mouth they crept, and sudden all were gone. There Dam upstart out of her den afraid, and rushed forth, hurling her hideous tail about her cursed head, whose folds displayed were stretched now forth at length without entrail. She looked about, and seeing one in mail, armed to point, sought back to turn again, for light she hated as the deadly bale. I want in the desert darkness to remain, where plain none might her see, nor she see any plain. Which, when the valiant elf perceived, he leapt as lion fierce upon the flying prey, and with his trenchant blade her boldly kept from turning back, and forced her to stay. Therewith enraged she loudly 'gan to bray, and turning fierce her speckled tail avance, threatening her angry sting him to dismay, who, naught aghast, his mighty hand ende glanced. The stroke down from her head unto her shoulder glanced. Much daunted with that dint her sense was dazed, yet kindling rage herself she gathered round, and all at once her beastly body raised, with doubled forces high above the ground. Though wrapping up her wretched stern around, leapt fierce upon his shield, and her huge train all suddenly about his body wound, that hand or foot or stir he strove in vain. God help the man so wrapped in error's endless train. His lady, sad to see his sore constraint, cried out, "Now, now, Sir Knight, show what ye be. Add faith unto your force, and be not faint. Strangle her, else she will strangle thee." That when he heard, in great perplexity, his gall did grate for grief and high disdain, and knitting all his force, got one hand free, wherewith he gripped her gorge with so great pain, that soon to loose her wicked bands did her constrain. Therewith she spewed out her filthy maw, a flood of poison horrible and black, full of great lumps of flesh and gobbets raw, which stunk so vividly that it forced him back, his grasping hold, and from her turn him back. Her vomit full of books and papers was, with loathy frogs and toads with eyes did lack, and creeping sought way in the weedy grass. Her filthy parbreak all the place defiled has. As when old Father Nilus skins to swell, with timely pride above the Egyptian vale, his fatty waves do fertile slime outwell, and overflow each plain and lowly dale. But when his later spring gins to avail, huge heaps of mud he leaves, wherein there breed 10,000 kinds of creature, partly male and partly female, of his fruitful seed. Such ugly monstrous shapes elsewhere may no man read. The same so sore annoyed has the knight, that, well nigh choked with the deadly stink, his forces fail, ne can no longer fight. Whose courage when the fiend perceived to shrink, she poured forth out her hellish sink, her fruitful cursed spawn of serpents small, deformed monsters foul and black as ink, which swarming all about his legs did crawl, and him encumbered sore, but could not hurt at all. As gentle shepherd in sweet eventide, when ruddy Phoebus gins to whelk in west, high on a hill his flock to view and wide, marks which doth bite their hasty supper best. A cloud of cumbrous gnats do him molest, or striving to inflex their feeble stings, that from their annoyance he know where he can rest, but with his clownish hands their tender wings he brusheth oft, and oft doth mar their murmurings. Thus ill bested, and fearful more of shame than of certain peril he stood in, Half furious unto his foe he came, resolved in mind all suddenly to win, all sworn to lose, before he once would lin, and stroke at her with more than manly force, that from her body, full of filthy sin, he raft her hateful head without remorse. A stream of coal-black blood forth gushed from her course. Her scattered brood, soon as their parent dear, they saw so rudely falling to the ground, groaning full deadly, all with troublous fear, gathered themselves about her body round, weening their wonted entrance to have found at her wide mouth. But being there withstood, they flocked all about her bleeding wound, and sucked up their dying mother's blood, making her death their life, and eke her hurt their good. That detestable sight him much amazed, to see the unkindly imps of heaven accursed devour their dame, on whom while so he gazed, having all satisfied their bloody thirst, their bellies swoln he saw with fullness burst, and bowels gushing forth, well worthy end of such a drunken life, the which them nursed. Now needeth him no longer labour spend, his foes have slain themselves, with whom he should contend. This is just marvelous stuff. And if you get the chance, I would fully recommend going and reading Spenser's The Fairy Queen. It is one of the great works of English literature. It is very stirring and marvelous. And I mean, that encounter that we've just read, it's like something from a Dark Souls boss fight, but there's something beautiful about reading it with such elegant poetry, and with the multiple meanings that are going on there intentionally. There's a lot to get from this story, and as I intimated, it had a profound effect upon the St. George tradition. After this story, you get the emergence of a St. George who is often associated with going on a quest with a princess. Uh, in this story, she's called Una. In others, she's called Sabrina. There's often an association with being a princess of Egypt or somewhere of that ilk. And George, after slaying the dragon, going on adventures with her or being more involved with her. This is a clear departure from the Christian martyr who died a single chaste man. So we have a blending here of those two things. And while George was associated with England much earlier than this and was made the de facto patron saint by Edward III, I think in this period, with a new Englishness emerging as distinct from Europe, distinct from Catholicism, St. George becomes a sort of emblem of that Anglican Protestant Englishness, which you might see in somebody like Sir Francis Drake, Sir Walter Raleigh, and so on. These great Tudor characters. So I think this is a well-worthy text. I hope that you go and read it. I hope that you've enjoyed this little excerpt, and it's been a real pleasure to share this with you. Till next time, God bless you all. Bye for now, friends, and go to the corncrakemag.com for more stories like this.